I would like to just mention something, and this isn't part of the script or the program, but you're hearing a lot about the Wisconsin Alzheimer's Disease Research Center this evening, and I suspect many of you understand what that organization is. But just as a reminder, we sometimes don't recognize what is in our own backyard, and we can be mighty proud that here at our own University of Wisconsin, a global research university, we have been selected to be the home of one of the Alzheimer's Disease Research Centers that is funded by the National Institutes of Health. And so that when you hear Wisconsin ADRC, you are hearing recognition from the NIH that here in Madison, Wisconsin, at our own university, some of the really cutting-edge research is going on to find solutions for Alzheimer's and the other dementias. So I just want to make sure that people understand that, because sometimes we just, as I said, don't realize what we have right here, and we can be very proud of that. So now we're ready to begin the second half of our program, and I am really looking forward to this next speaker. It's a field and an area of interest that will apply not only to the subject matter tonight, but to everything as we diagnose and begin to understand and comprehend what is told to us by the news media on many, many subjects of scientific nature. And our next speaker is Dr. Dominic Broussard, and she is professor and chair in the Department of Life Sciences Communication at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Dr. Bussard is on the steering committee of the UW-Madison Robert and Jean Holtz Center for Science and Technology Studies and an affiliate of the UW-Madison Center for Global Studies. She is also the leader of the Societal Implications of Nanotechnology Group in the National Science Foundation-funded Nanoscale Science and Engineering Center. Wow. Her teaching responsibilities include courses in strategic communication theory and research with a focus on science and risk communications. Dr. Broussard's research program concentrates on the intersection between science, media, and policy. A fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science and a board member of the International Network of Public Communication of Science and Technology, Dr. Broussard is an internationally known expert in public opinion dynamics related to controversial scientific issues. She is particularly interested in understanding the role of values in shaping public attitudes and in cross-cultural analysis to understand these processes. Her lab's recent work has focused on scientific discourse in online environments, such as Twitter. She is going to talk about tonight the brave new world of science, new media, and the public. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Dominic Bussard.
Thank you for these kind words. It's really my pleasure to be here and talk to you about some of the research findings that I've been focusing on the intersection between science, the new media environment, the internet, and the public, all of us here in this room, as we're trying to make sense of new advances in scientific research and how they play out in new media environment. What I'd like to briefly tell you about today is, first of all, why all of us here as informed citizens, we need to actually be informed science consumers and informed science information consumers as we make sense of any advance in scientific research around the globe. And this is linked to the fact that science communication has been evolving later, the last decade, and has really changed the way scientific information come in our hands as people that are interested in following up what's going on. I'll tell you a little bit of this science information consumer as this person is confronted with the specificity of the online environment. In a nutshell, the rules of the games have changed. And as I say in a lot of contexts, now is the World Wide West as we talk about scientific information. How do we make sense of the information we can trust? How do we actually find that's interesting to us? And how do we know that what we find is actually relevant to our needs and really comply with what we call scientific validity in scientific circles. And to illustrate that aspect, I will go more in depth into a study that we've published recently that identified something that we called the nasty effect, and this is something that particularly takes place in online environment. So the first thing that we need to keep in mind, and you're all aware of this as interested science information consumers, and I know that the people in this room don't represent, the average consumer of science. We all are interested. That's why we're here. That's why we're here listening to talks and wonderful points that the speakers have brought to the table. But most of the information and scientific conversation that are interested for us happen in the public arena rather than the scientific arena. To some extent, we learn to confront science information while we are in schools. Look at that little box here, the green and the pink. That represent the little cube in our lifetime where we actually are confronted to scientific information in a very set framework, where we know that the people that talk to us in the room are talking to us because they have learned about it and they know actually how to trust the information they give us. However, if you look at the rest of the cube here, or the gray, this is where we found scientific information nowadays. And most of that information come to us from sources, most of the time, mediated information sources through news media and other type of information environment. It may be through information with colleagues. It may be from well-intentioned family members, but most of the time out of a scientific framework that would give us confidence in the information. So this is because now traditional views of science communication have been redefined. What we know from research is when people want to find out something about a scientific or health issue, what they will do first is Google it. Google, good job, you'll get an A. Google is, however, bringing up a lot of information. I'm going to talk about it, as we know from research, as far as the information that's retrieved. The second thing that has changed as far as information about science and health is concerned is the mediated environment is changing. You know that actually newspapers are facing a crisis. That means that actually people that were traditionally trained to cover science and health issues are actually disappearing from mainstream newspapers. So that means that actually reporters that are doing their best to follow advances in different fields are also asked to cover politics, technology, business, and so on, without, always being trained to do so in a way that we would expect for people that have, important implications for the world in which we live. Another change is the advent of blogs. Blogs are basically a way to actually put information out there by any interested citizens. Right now, anybody can actually produce a blog. I'm not saying that they're good or bad. I'm saying that this is the trend. Science blog being the biggest conglomerate of science and health-related issues online. And what's interesting with science blog, if you look at who actually writes in the science blog, 60 bloggers selected on the basis of their originality, insight, talent, and dedication. This doesn't tell me much about how much I can trust what they say. On the other hand, it's exciting to see that they're excited, and I'm all excited for them. And by the way, I have some friends that work there, so don't tell them that I'm making fun of them. But it does raise the issue, though, that the characteristic of this support for scientific information is really not based, to some extent, on a trust in their education, or at least their training, in being able to reflect accurately what scientific research say about a scientific topic. It's one thing to publish in a peer-reviewed scientific journal, and we have our colleagues here at University of Wisconsin-Madison that excellent research in that regard. It's another thing to translate it in a way that reflects not only the accuracy of the information, but also in ways that you and I, that are not medical researchers, can actually understand in a way that makes sense with a mental framework, that makes sense with our way we live information, we interact with it, and we make sense of it. And this is why science communication comes into play. Try to, in my department such as mine, to train people to do so, and also understand how does those processes come to play on the environment and potentially change people's views about the half topic of the scientific topic that's at play. Another difference here is YouTube. Believe it or not, YouTube is actually used a lot by adults in the United States. 70% of Americans mention that they go to YouTube to find out about a scientific topic. I actually YouTube Googled Alzheimer to see what came up, and not surprisingly, a lot of human interest stories came up that had more than 1 million views. This is actually obviously something that's important and interesting and touching and that we need to actually keep track of. However, it doesn't replace the importance of other type of scientific communication conduits that can actually give us accurate information about science. By the way, this is actually a really good video that's about climate change, very different. The only reason I put it out there is because he's actually a science education teacher in high school. And what he did is like, what the heck? This is where people go. I will do my best to actually get good information out there. However, if you look at this, you don't have really any type of shortcuts, any type of, heuristic that tells you this is an information you can trust. This would be based on your own research on this specific video to make sense of the context in which that communication takes place. And this is just to make fun of my engineering friends, because I thought you needed a little love here. Traditionally, we used to say that engineers were not good at communication. I hope that you don't have a lot of engineers in the room here. But with YouTube, yes, they do. Now, they're able to actually do also communicate the scientific research in ways that make sense. This is actually a video about nanomaterials, tiny, tiny planes, that actually can fly around in a variety of complicated patterns that generated 6 million views. So on the one hand, we need to be wary of that online environment where we don't really know who to trust or what information is accurate. On the other hand, that accurate information is out there. So I'll talk more about this later on. The third pattern that we need to think about is that online science news and social media have replaced science news sources. This is actually the state of the affairs, and my colleague journalists usually are not happy with and tell them that, but our research so consistently that the content that actually put in social media is used by people as information sources. And this is, again, something that we need to be aware of and work all together to make sure it doesn't impact, to some extent, the credibility of scientific research. It doesn't hurt those who actually could benefit from that information in the first place. If you look at Facebook here, and you see that they have put together a Facebook page just for journalists, and you compare their daily active users in thousands here in the United States, 126 million active users on Facebook in the United States, and you compare that with the circulation of the US 10 largest newspapers in the United States, here 8 million, that were traditionally, where most of the people would find out about scientific research, you can see that social media does have a lot of power. And as a matter of fact, interestingly enough, the Pulitzer Prize, which gives the prize for the best reporting, in-depth reporting in a variety of issues, recently, in 2012, gave the prize to 2 online-only sources, and most recently gave a prize to a tiny blog that's actually with 7 journalists that cover issues about climate change. So where does that leave us? Is that it's hard for us to actually make sense of what can be trusted, when, to what extent, and for which purposes, particularly since science information can also go viral. What does it mean? It does mean that some issue that might seem interesting to someone for whatever reason, gets connected to a network of other people that send it to other people, that send it to other people, and this is how you end up with a YouTube video that has, let's say, 6 million views. This phenomenon of virality actually has been studied for a long time in computer science. And right now, my lab and others are trying to understand what makes science and health information viral, and how can we determine in which path this information gets disconnected with actually the original scientific study in ways that may change the validity of the information. So again, this is research that's in infancy, but it's very important to remember that if science information go viral, it doesn't mean that viral is valid. So a lot of things that go sent around is sent around not because it's good. It's sent around because it's sent around. And it's interesting because actually right now we're trying to understand why does it get sent around, and that's that issue of virality. But it's really a take-home message. The first being, how do you know that you can trust what's out there because of, blogs and such? Second of all, because it's sent around doesn't mean that you can trust it, and it's extremely important to remember that those networks, us in this room, we all together here because we share an interest. We are part of a social network of people connected around an issue. Most likely, we will send around something that we see that connects to the issue that we're interested about. However, we need to all know that we're part of that virality, that we need to be careful when we send things around, because it can really have that boomerang effect of spreading misinformation much faster than we would hope it will happen. So it's, again, some food for thought that's really close to our hearts here as we think of science communication. It does sound great, though. We can find everything we want with Magic Google, and we can find virtually anything about anything from anywhere, because most of us have cell phones, if we can actually have wireless connection. But so that is indeed quite good. And I would say that, I'm all for the wealth of information that can be found on the online environment, particularly since we know that the science information consumer, you and I, we are going online. If you look at the recent National Science Board study here, that look at where people find information about different events. I was trying to find the clicker, but I don't know where it is. Current news event, most people still follow television and newspaper. Those are the blue. Science and technology in general, people follow still television and newspapers. You see that the black is growing, that's the internet. Specific scientific and health issues, people go mainly to the internet. That's the main source of information for the issues that are interesting to us. And the other point about the internet that we need to keep in mind is that it's not the audience anymore. And this is, again, something that I need to repeat as a take-home message that's important to think about. As I was talking to virality and the fact that things get sent around, it's not the audience anymore. And a famous professor at NYU actually said, it's the people formerly known as the audience. It's you and I that make the news. It's you and I that send things around. It's you and I that have the responsibility to actually make sure that what we are looking at, send around, and consume actually abides by the scientific standards of the researchers that actually are doing a lot to put that scientific research out there in peer-reviewed journals. So why is it so important, and why am I so wary about the online context? Well, first of all, I was telling you about Google. So Google, as we were saying, is the first step when you look for information. And the first thing that happened when you Google, again, you can be Boeing, you can be Bing or other browsers. The first thing that will happen is like you're going to get some shortcuts, right? And those shortcuts that you see here, Alzheimer disease, Alzheimer walk, and then you can see that like here, the third that you get is Wikipedia, which, by the way, the most used database, actually, by my students. Yes, exactly. But they comes in the first page of results. And we know from research that as human beings, we tend to click on the first page of results. That's it. 80% of internet users that look for something specific will click on the first page. So take home number 2, we need to go over those pages until we can find the sources that we trust. And what's interesting, actually, when you look at those new environments for the science information consumer, and you look at what people search for, what they find, and the content they get exposed to after doing that, and you can find different data sets that help you do that. The Nielsen data set gives you what people search. You can actually track the shortcuts. An intelligent algorithm in computer science that my lab develops actually gathers all the content and tries to compare it with actually what people search for. And what we've found, and this is something that we've done in, and nothing's happening. Oh, and we have found, it's a surprise. So what we have found, as I don't know why my computer got disconnected, but I'll connect it again, is that there is a disconnect. It's fine, it's just turning on again for some reason. I don't know why it's doing that. What we have found is like there's a disconnect between what people look for in the online environment, and that's research that we did with nanotechnology, but actually we could do for other topics as well. The type of keywords they put on, what they look for, the search terms that are suggested to them, and the content they found. Let's say, put it very simply, people search for nanotechnology and environment. They're most likely to get results that are related to nanotechnology and health. Why is that, you would ask? Well, it's because it's what we call the self-information spiral. What people look for drives Google suggestions. The Google suggestions drive the searchers drive the traffic drives the page rank, and people click on that. Therefore, what you're looking for is not what you will find. So you need to know that when you search, very complicated algorithm actually will determine what you find, and it's not always what you think you wanted to find. And so it means that it will need to, as science literate citizen, we need to understand that if we begin searching online, it's a little more complicated than just looking at the searches and thinking that we have found something interesting. As a matter of fact, a number of researchers, such as myself, have called attention ethically to what we call the filter bubble. That idea that that filter really, prevents us from having access to some type of science and health information and gives us access to others. And our opinions are based really on how Google presents results more than what we are looking for. So very important thing to keep in mind. The last thing to keep in mind is that information that we find is contextualized. What do I mean by that? So this is like a random page from most popular science topics that were, appearing in a newspaper. And if you look closely here, you can see that you have Facebook likes, retweets, most popular science. Again, popular, use of those topics will make sure that you are exposed to those instead of others that may be interesting to you. And we don't really know, actually we know because my lab is working on it, how that the information that's contextualized may impact how you react to these topics. Imagine that you were at Starbucks 10 years ago with a newspaper and looking at the health column and you see something very exciting. Okay, so you're there. You're not begin, shouting to your neighbor, look at that, this is not good. Oh yes, indeed, let's send it to our friends. Well, that's what happened in the online environment. Those Facebook likes, those retweets, those contexts will actually change how you process the information where you find it. And again, this is a human psychological process. This is normal, but we need to be aware of it. And so basically, reader comments and feedbacks, Facebook retweets, Facebook likes, retweets, and so on, all that information may actually shape how we think about issues in science and health. So I'm going to finish by giving you an example of this type of effects. And this is something that we have experienced in blog comments. think about blog comments. So let's say you find an interesting health study in a blog, and this blog has comments. Those comments can be uncertain. Is this true? Is it not true? Can be emotional. There is hope or angry. This is bad. People may disagree. And people also very often, sadly enough, can be rude in these blog comments. For whatever reason, in the online environment, we have something that's called, uncivility, trolling, and so on, that comes and, and does, very bad things, I would say, to civil discourse. So the nasty effect I want to talk about to conclude today is related to that incivility in the online environment. The fact that people may be actually quite rude to each other when they discuss science and health, among other issues, because they get very passionate about what they found. And this study was published in the Journal of Computer Mediated Communication and got quite a bit of attention last year. So basically what we did is that we had a study here, is about nanosilver, it could have been about whatever, where we really look at different approaches and the benefit of the risk of that approaches, scientific sound reporting in a fake newspaper written by a science reporter. And what we did is that we exposed people from the general population, again, a trial, like a clinic, such as a clinical study, where we compare effects among different groups. And the people were randomly assigned to two conditions. Half of the people saw the story, the science story, with rude comments. And half of the people saw the same story with actually civil comments. And we were trying to disentangle the effect of these comments on the very well-written science story that you may encounter when you go online looking for information about Alzheimer or other things. And again, remember, only the tone changed, not the content, so just name calling. What we find is that nasty effect, that the tone in comments polarize the readers. That means that people that read the rude comments, they came up out of the story not only by thinking that the science story was biased, and again, the science story was balanced, it was a really well-written story, and also a much more polarized understanding of the risk. Basically, just seeing those rude comments made people not trust the story, the science story, and make them also see much more risk in the topic at hand than there was actually in the story. So what's interesting, and again, because I think that's funny, like I always like when I end up being the topic of the study because of my study, it's kind of like ironic, but our study became a case in point. The first media mention of this study came in the journal Sentinel. It was actually in the first page. Online comments hurt science literacy, study shows. It went then on the online version of the Sentinel. What's different in the online environment? Comments. With a lot of comments actually that talked about our study, and different mentions on Facebook, and then very nasty comments. I was actually accused to be a very reptilian overlord. Careful. And other things, so interesting, which, by the way, do you know The Onion, right? Well, they have like a serious counterpart. It's called the AV Club, where they criticize the media. And they said, awful online comments hurt understanding of news, report local news site filled with awful online comments. So I guess we don't know very well how people came out of, the reporting about our study, which is a very good study, written by actually a Pulitzer winner, Mark Johnson, science writer in the journal Sentinel, but actually was really, conflicted with those comments. Interestingly enough, that our study was covering science outlets, in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science, in different Nature, then on Science Writer, and then it went viral. Again, I'm like, wow. And so it went viral in the United States and then around the world. And this is what's interesting for me to look at that case in action. Because, and I'm not pulling some of those headlines, but the story got changed. The results of my study suddenly got changed. And suddenly we were there attacking, freedom of speech and saying that everybody should turn off their comments. We had never said that, obviously. But the idea is, my case in point here, you need to go back to the original study. And you need to be able to trace back where the study was published in the first place, and who was reporting it. The New York Times actually got, interested in the story and did ask us to write a very interesting editorial, making the whole thing linked again to the original study. But we were lucky to do that. I mean, it's not all of us, science researchers that are able to do that. Popular Science magazine actually shot their comments saying that they were wary of the type of incivility that happens in this kind of environment. And actually, we are happy to see that we're making a difference as far as scientific literacy for UI and people like us that are interested in science and health. In sum, if I have to conclude and give you just like some tips as far as what it means to be an informed consumer of scientific information, I would say be wary of search results, that these don't represent always what you're looking for, that you need to realize that what's in the first page of those search results might not be what you want. The second thing is that, the online science news, as all science news, can be simplistic, and the informed consumer of scientific information will aim to find the trusted sources before actually making sure that this goes viral and go in different social networks. The informed consumer of scientific information is wary of online comments and other conceptual information, because even if you think you're not reading them, and if you're telling me, I'm not reading them, it doesn't make a difference, our effects were apparent without people even realizing that they were in an uncivil condition. And a lot of people told us that they hadn't read the comments, but still psychologically can affect people. The informed consumer of scientific information uses trusted tactics to find out what's going on in the field of their interest. So I'm sure that the Alzheimer Research Center has a Twitter account or potentially a research blog. Do you? They will soon, because they're going to work with me, where they can actually be, basically, the sounding board to make sure that things that can be trusted about new research on, maybe the Alzheimer Association has something. I don't know. I have to check, right? Yeah. And so follow those trusted sources and have tactics to make sure that the work is due for you whenever you want to find out about an information. Finally, last but not least, the informed consumer of scientific information produces trusted scientific information, him or herself. All of us in this room, we have a vested interest for people being, well informed about an issue that's interesting to us. So it's up to all of us to make sure that what's get disseminated, if we are sending it around through email and such, is actually done with a grain of salt. And that we all have a responsibility as information consumers in making sure that scientific information and scientific information dynamics can be trusted. So please come to see me in all those online environments where I am all the time, which is Twitter or my department, and the scimapwiz.edu, that's a scimap lab, science, media, and the public. We post a lot of information related to these issues. Thank you for your attention.